These fought in any case by Ezra Pound. These fought in any case, and some believing pro domo in any case. Some quick to arm, some for adventure, some from fear of weakness, some from fear of censure, some for love of slaughter and imagination, learning later, some in fear, learning love of slaughter. Died some pro patria, non dulce, non et decor, walked eye deep in hell, believing in old men's lies, then unbelieving, came home, home to a lie, home to many deceits, home to old lies and new infamy, usury age old and age thick, and liars in public places, daring as never before, wastage as never before, young blood and high blood, fair cheeks and fine bodies, fortitude as never before, frankness as never before, delusions as never told in the old days, hysterias, trench confessions, laughter out of dead bellies. There died a myriad, and of the best among them, for an old bitch gone in the teeth, for a botched civilization. Charm smiling at the good mouth, quick eyes gone under earth's lid, for too gross of broken statues, for a few thousand battered books. So this is a video clip showing some images of young men to the lines from this particular poem by Ezra Pound, and you've obviously realized that the poem's about war and the waste of young lives. So in the short video clip that you've just watched, you would have noticed that there were young men, and it touched on a few of the themes: young men, the waste of young lives, the men sent to the front lines who die in battle. And so the poem was protesting that. And so it's a very good poem and a very popular one. However, Ezra Pound was quite a controversial figure, and not just because he dressed in quite a strange romantic fashion with a cape, and maintained a menage a trois with his wife and a mistress, but he was interesting for other reasons. He spent a lot of time with some other well-known writers like Ernest Hemingway, D.H. Lawrence, etc. And he was awarded a few degrees, 2 BAs and an MA in Spanish, and even worked as secretary to William Butler Yeats while championing imagism, which is his term for modern poetry. So he's definitely a modernist poet, but he wasn't without controversy, as I've said. He was an anti-Semite and a proponent of Hitler's butchery and Mussolini's fascism. So he supported those two leaders, and because of that, he was eventually arrested and charged with treason. And he managed to escape hard prison time by pleading insanity, which he was criticized for. And it was in 1958, at the age of 72, that he managed to gain release from the asylum he was in because of the intervention of quite an impressive list of colleagues. And so, freed of all charges, he returned to Italy. He was known to write quite prolifically, and in 1922, he dropped many of his literary friends to move to Italy, where he lived for 20 years. His gravestone simply bears the name Ezra Pound, and he's been buried on the island of San Michel among the exiles, probably because of his very controversial ideology. Okay, so looking a little more closely at the poem, it's quite an interesting first line. These fought in any case, and it also serves as what we've used as the title. So these fought in any case. So in any case is quite an interesting phrase, and if we look at it closely, we know it to mean in spite of something. So we know the poem is about World War One because it talks about the trenches, eye deep in hell and trenches. So the suggestion is that the modern world is not worth fighting for. So they fought in any case, even though it wasn't really worth it. And some believing pro domo in any case. And then we've got that quite interesting use of ellipses, the first set. So pro domo is Latin for home. So they're fighting for their homelands. And if you think about the kind of propaganda that might have been used to get them to enroll, it makes quite a lot of sense in the context. So there would have been a lot of propaganda forcing young men to go to war and making them feel like they're cowards for not doing so. And so that's what would have been said. Come on, fight for queen and country, or king and country, it would have been at the time. And then we spoke about the use of the ellipses. And he seems to be asking if their homeland or the modern world was worth fighting for, and then leaves us with this invitation, this pause using the ellipses just to consider that. Was it worth going to war? Right, and then he lists. He says some quick to arm, some for adventure, some from fear of weakness, some from fear of censure, some for love of slaughter, in imagination learning later, some in fear learning love of slaughter. Okay, so he lists all the reasons that people might have gone to war, to arm, for adventure, weakness, etc. Using the repetition of that word some in every line. So why did they join? Adventure, weakness, censure. They had no idea what war was like, but their reasons for joining varied. And in their imagination, like a young boy with a toy gun, it might have seemed quite glamorous, even quite, the glory of war and the kind of fame that they might encounter as a result of their brave deeds on the field. But they learning later. And then there's, again, the use of ellipses to suggest that they learned that it wasn't glorious at all. Some died pro patria, non dulce, non et decor. Okay, so dulce et decorum est pro patria mori is Latin for it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. And you've probably encountered that phrase before because it's taken from Wilfred Owen's poem, a very famous anti-war poem. But his writing retranslates the phrase to mean that the soldiers died for their country, but it was not sweet and not fitting, non dulce, non et decor. And so it goes against the propaganda that would have encouraged them to go to war in the first place. And then it says, walked I deep in hell, believing in old men's lies. Then unbelieving came home to a lie. Okay, so the old men would have been the old men behind comfortable desks and comfortable offices, sending them off to the front line. And the front line would have been the trenches. So eye deep is much deeper than knee deep. And so it's hyperbole, which is fitting. But it's also not hyperbole, it's also literal. So denotatively, they actually were in the trenches. And so they would have been eye deep in a kind of a hell, because they would have peeped over the trenches. And in the trenches, the conditions would have been absolutely appalling. Believing in old men's lies, then unbelieving, came home to a lie, home to many deceits, home to old lies and new infamy. So instead of coming home and feeling famous, they would have come home and felt like it was all a lie. They didn't go off and have a glorious time killing people. It was awful. They lost people. They saw the horrors of war firsthand. And instead of coming home and feeling famous, they would have felt infamous, which is, is being famous for the wrong kinds of reasons. For example, a well-known criminal is infamous because of the atrocities they might have committed. And this is how they felt. And then I said earlier that the old men are the politicians who lie about the glory of war. And then when they come back and triumph, they actually feel like that's just actually a lie. It doesn't feel triumphant at all. Okay, and then usury, age old and age thick, and liars in public places. So usury is the practice of lending out money and charging the person a ton of interest. In simple terms, it's a great way to make a lot of money for doing absolutely nothing, and Pound wasn't a fan of that at all. He also wasn't a fan of modern politicians whom he considered to be liars in public places. And so that's what he's referring to there. Usury, age old and age thick, and liars in public places. Daring as never before, wastage as never before, young blood and high blood. So it doesn't matter if you're young or old, you all die pointlessly. So daring and wastage is a salute to those young men who were brave, but it's a terrible waste. The old men survived safe in their offices, but the young men, high and low born, died pointlessly, he says. Fair cheeks and fine bodies, again, talking about the youth, and fortitude as never before. So fortitude is another salute to the men who fought bravely and died. So talking about what they were able to withstand. And then he moves on, he says, frankness as never before, delusions as never told in the old days. Hysterias, trench confessions, laughter out of dead bellies. So frankness as never before and delusion as never told in the old days refers to the returned men who now understood properly what war was about and actually decided to talk about it. And then we've got this very interesting line about the hysterias and the trench confessions and the laughter out of dead bellies. So the hysterias and trench confessions refers to the terrible things they saw, and it would have a lot of what they would have experienced might have made them actually feel insane. At times, if not permanently, they must have seen some terrible things, experienced terrible things. And hysteria is a really serious mental disorder that can be caused by that kind of trauma. Okay. And then it says laughter out of dead bellies, which is just awful. It's possibly the hysterical or maniacal laughter of the men who are now just empty shells of their former selves. The horror of war could drive a person insane or elicit laughter at a world gone mad. That should say mad. Perhaps the dead were also laughing at the pointlessness of their deaths, or perhaps this was the sound of the putrid gases that the putrid gases made as they escaped the rotting corpses, although that's probably less likely. It's probably more the men themselves laughing hysterically and maniacally because of the trauma that they've suffered. There died a myriad, and of the best among them, for an old bitch gone in the teeth for a botched civilization. So a myriad is a multitude who died, and the old bitch, he blamed England and Queen Victoria, who was the longest reigning monarch, and so he used her to represent England. So she would have been the old bitch gone in the teeth. And again, he's talking about a botched civilization, just the modern world just being an absolute disaster. So that's about Queen Victoria. And okay, all right, and then the lines: charm smiling at the good mouth, quick eyes gone under earth's lid. Quick eyes is archaic, meaning alive, now dead under the ground. So the quick eyes, and so charm smiling at the good mouth, quick eyes gone under earth's lid. And it's just emphasizing the tragedy of the loss. And then for 2 gross of broken statues, for a few thousand battered books, he ends with, statues and history books are modern records of achievement, but they're broken and battered. So you've got quite plosive alliteration, broken and battered. It's quite emphatic ending on those two hard B sounds. No achievement in war, just death and pointless loss. Thank you.